Every now and then I'll be reading along in the Old Testament and come across the word Bale. Who in the world was this guy?
Joshua, we've certainly not only come across the word Bale in our own reading of the Old Testament, as you indicate, but also in our journey through the Old Testament. So this is a good time to understand who Bale is, perhaps get a better geopolitical and social and theological understanding of kind of this major person in the Old Testament. So let's start historically. Israel does not confront Bale, this Canaanite fertility god, until Numbers chapter 25. They're just about ready to enter the promised land when Moses tells us there's a great apostasy or falling away at a place called Bale Peor. For the first time in her existence, Israel is introduced to Bale and Canaanite fertility religion. Now you can see on the slide what may look somewhat confusing, but this helps us understand why Baal and Baal worship was such a trap to Israel in her history. From Baal Peor, Numbers 25, until the end of Malachi, we are going to have to live with the claims of Baal. So first of all, just to set the record straight, his name really isn't Baal, technically. Baal is just a Semitic and really a Hebrew word for owner or master or husband or lord. His real name is Hadad, all right? But he is called a lord, master, ruler, husband. And so throughout the Old Testament, when they refer to Baal, they're referring technically to this Canaanite god Hadad. You can see on your slide that Baal is this male figure on the top. And also at the top of your slide, you see what archaeologists have unearthed in terms of a figurine or a statue of Baal and what people thought he looked like. But Baal has a female companion who is Asherah. And in our discussion in Judges chapter 2, the text talks about Baal and Asherah. And there you see also at the top of that slide what archaeologists have uncovered in terms of what people thought Asherah looked like. To understand the seduction of Baal worship, we have to understand something of Israel's geography. In Egypt, there is the Nile River, and the river and the irrigation of this river provides adequate water for the raising of crops. In the Mesopotamian kingdoms of Babylon and Assyria, they have the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which when used properly provide enough water to irrigate and grow crops. But in the land of Canaan, there is no such abundant source of water. You say, wait, what about the Jordan River? The Jordan River is not a major source of water. It's just simply a creek in some areas, and it never could provide enough hydration for Israel to properly irrigate and grow crops. So when you live in Canaan, you don't depend on rivers, you depend on rain. Well, so as Israel enters the land of Canaan, first on the plains of Moab at Baal Peor, Numbers 25, they begin to wonder, how are we going to grow crops? The answer, we need to make it rain. When my wife was a Lutheran school teacher down in Horse Prairie, Illinois for 4 years, every time we would discuss what's going on in the world with parishioners after church in the narthex to a person, everyone would eventually end up talking about rain. Why? They're farmers in southern Illinois. It's their livelihood. They are going to be made or broken by the amount of rain. As Israel moves into Canaan, they become farmers. They hadn't done any farming for 40 years. They'd been wandering in a wilderness taking care of cattle. So they enter Canaan, they talk to farmers, and all the farmers talk about is rain. The natural question is, how can we get enough rain? Well, you see on your slide this prominent cloud with rain coming out of it. How can I have abundant rain so the crops grow and I have enough food to eat and maybe some extra to sell and make a profit? This is where it becomes somewhat R-rated. So hear me out. I want it to rain. So I go to a local high place. We've talked about those already in our discussion. A high place, and there I would locate a Canaanite fertility prostitute. And she would have certain markings that would tell me, yes, this is the right woman for what I want to accomplish. The most famous Canaanite fertility prostitute in the Bible is probably Gomer. No, not Goober's brother of Andy, Opie, Barney, and Ernest T. Bass fame. This is Gomer, Hosea's wife. We'll look at that in the book of Hosea. But I want you to understand as you look at the lower part of your slide that as I seek rain, would go to this fertility goddess, much like Gomer, and I would have sex with her on the high place. This would be sacred sex or cosmic sex or universal religious sex. And there in that sexual act, I would cause Bale, or Hadad, and Asherah to have sex in heaven. When they have sex in heaven, guess what? It rains. And when it rains, the crops grow. And when the crops grow, I have food and I have money. Can you begin to see the trap and the seduction of Baal worship? A local Canaanite would come along and say, hey, come to church with me today. It's really exciting worship. You bet. And you are guaranteed rain. As we were going through Judges chapter 2, the author of Judges says that Israel prostituted themselves after other gods. I want you to understand that this has two levels to it. They prostituted themselves literally as they had sex with Canaanite prostitutes, and they also prostituted themselves in forsaking their bridegroom who had married them in the Exodus events. Let's back up. The prophets Hosea and Jeremiah tell us, through use of metaphor, that God in the Exodus events took Israel to be his bride, and he became the bridegroom. And so one way of looking at Israel's relationship with her God was by means of the marriage metaphor. So Israel not only prostituted with Canaanite prostitutes, they also forsook their one and only husband who had married them and called them out of Egypt to be his own. So who is Baal? Baal is this fertility god who promises you abundant sex and abundant money. That's why as we consider this question and answer, and as we try and understand the Old Testament and how it relates to our present ministry context, we can see that we live in the same culture, right? Gone berserk with sexual innuendos and sexual seduction. And we live in a culture that's gone berserk with doing anything to get more money. And I have as one of your questions that you're going to be discussing with your mentor during this time of the study, to see how does American culture in the 21st century relate to Israelite culture in the land, and how they are surrounded by Bale and Asherah. I pray that this is a healthy discussion with your mentor as you go about making connecting links between Canaanite fertility religion and the same context of your ministry in America today.